All right, welcome to the sixth installment of the Kentucky Elk Hunter webinar series. We're going to change directions a little bit today and talk more about elk biology and how elk biology relates to hunting elk. So a little bit of a gear change from our previous videos where we were focused more on the hunter. We're going to focus a little bit more on the elk. As I mentioned in the last episode, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, hit the bell icon to get notified. And that will let you know anytime these videos go live. Today, Joe and I are joined again by Dan Crank. Dan's an elk biologist with KDFWR as well as a lifelong elk hunter. And so I think you'll be seeing more of Dan in the future. We've got a couple other ideas to loop him in on. So Dan, take a moment to introduce yourself.
Okay, yeah, my name is Dan Crank. I'm a elk biologist with the department. I've been here for, 21 years now. So I came in basically at the beginning of the restoration program, about a year or two into it. So pretty much have been here through the whole process of bringing elk here and managing and all that. So it's been an interesting time to be an elk biologist, that's for sure.
I guarantee it. Yeah. So Dan took me out to Colorado the first time, like 2006, 2007, and I almost froze to death, but we had a good time. So got me hooked on that. So basically, this will be a little bit shorter than our previous video, so we're just going to jump right into it and let Dan roll through his presentation.
Okay, let me share my screen with our presentation here. We'll get this rolling. So, like John mentioned, today we're going to talk a little bit about elk biologies. What are elk? How are they basically built? What do they look like? Where do they live? Some of their activities. A little bit of kind of ecology things to throw in there a little bit, just so people have a better idea of what an elk really is. So, I can get to the next one here. For some reason I can't get it to move. There we go. So what is an elk? The scientific name of an elk is Cervus canadensis. There is some speculation or discussion whether there are separate subspecies of elk or if there were separate subspecies of elk. It kind of just depends on who you talk to, but they're most closely related to red deer. They're more over in Europe, but they are their own separate species from red deer. They are one of the largest of the deer species. And of course, you have a lot of little tiny deer that are in Africa, but we're used to seeing white-tailed deer and mule deer here. The largest of the deer species is a moose, which is probably the most closely in size to an elk. So they are an even-toed ungulate, which means they have two toes, just like a whitetail does. They've got they're hoofed animals, so they have those two hooves. Unlike a horse or a cow that's a one-toed ungulate basically. They are ruminant, which means they have a four-chambered stomach, which is specially designed for basically for grazing animals, so they can utilize grasses and forbs and that kind of thing. Whereas a human or a bear or something like that has a simple single stomach, and we can't digest those fibers and that real fibrous material. That's what a ruminant is specialized to do, is to be able to eat grasses and forbs and actually digest those and get some nutrition out of it. So some physical characteristics of elk. They're basically described as having thick bodies with slender legs and short tail. An elk, even though you look at one, you may not think it has a tail because you can't hardly see it, but they do. It's probably about 3 to 6 inches long, maybe, depending on the animal. It is kind of hard to see, but they do have a real short tail. The average height of an adult elk is around 5 feet at the shoulder. There are some differences in cows are maybe a little bit shorter, but generally they're about 5 feet at the shoulder. And again, as we're talking terminology, the females are called cows. The males are called bulls. as far as weights, the average cow is around 400 pounds, depending on her age and what kind of nutrition she has. Bulls, depending on the time of year, an adult bull that's say 4 or 5 years old, say late winter, after he's been through winter, he may go down to 400 pounds, maybe 450 pounds. Through the summertime, where you have real good forage and availability, he'll increase his weight sometimes up to 900 pounds prior to rut. About this time of year is when they'll be their heaviest. And then generally they'll lose a lot of that weight during a rut because they basically don't eat. They're busy chasing cows around and have different things on their mind. And they basically don't eat for a couple of months, and they'll lose a lot of that weight, which is basically stored fat. So they're still healthy. They just lose that fat store. And then, they are an antlered animal. They're antlers, not horns. So they do shed those antlers every year. And only the males have antlers. We have had, every now and then you'll see something weird though. I've seen one cow with an antler before, and it was very odd. It like grew out the middle of her head. It was only about that long. She looked like a unicorn running around, but generally only the males have antlers. The coloration will tend to change a little bit depending on season. Right now, most elk have more of a reddish color to them. And as fall progresses and they get that winter coat coming in, it turns to more of a darker red into a brown. Bulls will be generally a little bit lighter. They'll be more of a light tan, especially in deep into wintertime. You can tell a bull from a cow from a distance just by the color of them. Bulls are generally a really light tan in wintertime, and those cows kind of hold on to that brownish tan color, more of a darker color. So we'll get into a little bit of biology here as far as reproduction. Elk are a little bit different than say whitetails. Whitetails generally can breed their first year. So a deer born right now can be bred that fall. It's pretty hard on them, but they can do that. Elk, though, cannot generally do that. They generally cannot be bred until they're at least a yearling. So kind of their second year of life, that second fall, is when they can actually have the body size and nutrition and be healthy enough to be bred. So they are bred in the fall, and they will give birth that next spring, about 260 days later, something like that, around mid-May to mid-June, depending on exactly when they were bred that fall. Like I said, females are typically not reproductively active until that second year of life. We have seen a few yearlings that are bred through our winter captures. We test all those elk when we capture them. We draw some blood and I send that off, and they can do basically a blood pregnancy test. And some of our yearlings are bred, which is kind of, it's exciting to see that. We don't know exactly. It's one of the things we're doing with our calf study is if we can catch a bred yearling, to see if one, that they successfully have a calf that year. Number two, they raise that calf, and then what happens that next year? Are they healthy enough they can be bred again? Because generally an adult elk will be bred every year, as long as she's stays pretty healthy. So that's one of the interesting things we found here in the last few years is we do have some yearlings that are pregnant. So that's pretty interesting to us. The one other thing is generally elk only have one calf, whereas whitetails, a healthy whitetail generally should have twins every year once they're an adult. But with elk, they only have one calf. It's very, very rare they ever have twins, and even if they do, there's a good chance one of those won't make it. It's too much stress on the cow to produce that much milk to keep two calves alive. So, and generally those calves will stay with their mother until the next spring, when she basically has to take off and she wants to be alone to have her calf for that year, she'll kick that calf off of her, which is basically now a yearling, and then she'll take off on her own. And it's kind of interesting. Those yearlings will actually form a yearling group all by themselves until all those adult cows are done, having their calves. They stay away for a week or two, maybe a month. Then all those cows will group back up, and they'll find those yearling groups will find them, and they all kind of form what's called a nursery herd. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But so they're generally, they kick those calves off right before they go have their calf for that year. So, like I said, generally they'll have a calf every year. The literature basically says that traditional Western elk, of course, they're bred that second year of life when they're a 2-year-old. And they'll have a calf every year until about 7 years old. And typically they'll start kind of going downhill. They're getting kind of up in age and maybe not the best nutrition, but things here are a little bit different. We have mild winters. Elk don't have to migrate here. There's plenty of food throughout the wintertime for them. And we've had cows up into 15 to 20 years old. They're still having a calf maybe not every year, but they're pregnant. So that's one real interesting thing we found out too is we have some cows that are pretty old that are still healthy enough to have a calf and raise that calf. So that's been another interesting thing we found. So we'll get into the social structure of elk. Elk are a herd animal. They love to be with other animals. They're very social. They're not solitary at all. The only time they're ever solitary is when those pregnant cows go out this time of year. They want to be alone to have their calf and raise it for a little bit. Then they'll group right back up again, generally about middle of July. And bulls and cows will form different social groups. This time of year, like I said, the cows are off on their own, having their calves. The yearling cows and some of those yearling bulls will form a yearling cohort group this time of year. They're kind of hanging out by themselves or with those groups. And then you'll have the adult bulls will form a bachelor herd. And it could be anywhere from 3 to 10, 15 adult bulls just hanging out with each other. And you'll see that all through summer. And people that are out scouting, that's what they're probably going to see up until about maybe the 1st of August, middle of August, before those hormones start ramping up again for rut. They'll go out and see, oh man, there's 10 bulls in this one spot. Well, that's a great spot. Well, it's a good spot, but in the next month, all those bulls are going to bust up. They don't want to be together fighting all fall. So what you see in July, August is not really what you're going to see in that spot in September and October. They may be within 10 miles of there, but they're not going to be in those groups again. Now you will see some young bulls, the yearling bulls, the spikes, and maybe a 2.5-year-old bull. They may kind of group up because they're not big enough to compete with these bigger bulls and go get their butt whooped. So they kind of just stay alone. And then you also see, about July through August, these nursery herds, and that's these adult cows that had calves. They group back up in the social structure that they have the rest of the year. And you'll see, 20, 30 cows with, 20, 30 calves with them. And sometimes if you catch it just right, you may find a couple of cows bedded somewhere, and all those calves will be laying with those cows because they're kind of watching them for all the other mothers that are out trying to feed and keep that nutrition up. So that's another thing you'll kind of see sometimes. So as you move into, generally about the middle of August, of course, those bulls' antlers are now getting pretty hard. They're shedding their velvet. They're going to start busting up, and they're looking for cows now. So fall is when the breeding season is, when the rut is. It's a little earlier than what people are used to with whitetails. Generally, it starts about middle of September and can run later in the winter, depending on if a cow doesn't get bred. Say that first heat cycle she comes into in, you know, first or the middle or late September. If she doesn't get bred, 28 days later, she comes back into heat again. And that can kind of, not really, it can kind of expand the rut out a couple months later. Because if those cows are in heat, those bulls are still chasing. You know, you'll still hear them bugling a little bit. You'll see them chasing cows and acting goofy. So, and that's one thing that does affect those social groups. You know, even though the cows are really who's in charge of these groups, bulls will chase them around. They'll bust these larger groups of cows up. You may have seen these groups in early August that had 30, 40 cows in it. Now you've got a bull with 10 cows, and he's herding those cows all day long, every day, trying to keep them with him, to keep his you know, his breeding stock available. Basically, is what he's doing, and he'll fight off all these other bulls trying to keep those cows as his. So you'll see those social groups break up a little bit, but you always see a big cow in charge. You know, she's the one that leads them out in the evening to feed and takes them back into the woods in the morning for where they're going to stay during the day. So, and then as you get through the rut and you move more into, you know, probably 1st of November on through to probably March, you'll see these winter herds, which all these elk basically group back up again. And you'll see the biggest group sizes you'll ever see is in the wintertime, generally December through, you know, late February, somewhere in there is where you'll see these big groups. And you can't have big bulls in there. They may be off by themselves, kind of still resting and recuperating from that fall when they've been chasing cows all over the place. So it's a pretty interesting thing to watch how the social groups shift throughout the year, the different stages they go through. So I talked a little bit about rutting behavior. We'll kind of go more in depth in that. So like I said, the adult cows are really the social leaders of the herds you're going to see. Even though the bulls will chase them around and kind of try to make them go in a certain spot, he'll be a little successful in that, but it's usually an old adult cow that kind of rules the roost. And you've got a couple different ways you can talk about bulls. So you've got yearling bulls, which are your spikes. You have subadult bulls, which you can call satellite bulls. And then you have herd bulls, which are big adult bulls. And these herd bulls, the big bulls are, you know, these bulls that are probably 3.5+ years of age, generally 4 to 5 years old. And they're the ones that are really doing the breeding, or you hope they are anyway. They're the more successful in breeding than a yearling would be. But what happens is a herd bull may have 10 cows with him or 15 cows. Well, he's bugling and carrying on and getting all tore up. And as he's bugling, he's communicating with other bulls in that area to either, you know, I'm big, I'm bad, stay away. But in the same token, he's drawing bulls to him because these other bulls say, hey, I hear a bull over there. He's probably got some cows. I'm going to check it out. And it may be a lot of these younger satellite bulls too. You know, they're young, kind of dumb. They don't really know what's going on yet. So they'll try to sneak in the backside while the big bull's over here doing something. They'll sneak in over here trying to find a cow or two they can cut off. So it's a constant social battle all the time through the fall. And a lot of times for a hunter, these satellite bulls are pretty susceptible. You know, they're wanting to find cows pretty bad. And these big bulls are whooping up on them. And if you can sneak in on them, give them a couple little cow calls, you know, they're like, hey, there's a cow over there. And all the other big bulls are over here. I'm going to go that way and try to find that cow group. So that's one thing for hunters to look at, is sometimes those big herd bulls are really hard to pull away if he has a group of cows with him. You're going to have to get in pretty close to be able to get it, especially if you're an archery tag holder. You're going to have to get really close to make that work. But a satellite bull, you can pull him right out of there, right out of that group, and have a pretty good shot at him and have some really, really fun times drawing those bulls out, these younger bulls. Like I said, you know, elk are very vocal. All of the elk are, females and bulls both, and cows and bulls both. course, everybody's kind of used to hearing a bull bugle, but they make a lot of different noises. The bulls generally do bugle. You hear them mew a little bit. Cows mew all the time. I've got on here barks. If you get too close to an elk and they know you're there, you're going to hear them bark at you. It's a kind of a strange noise, but it's more of a kind of an aggressive call. It's an alert call to the other elk that, hey, something's over there. We need to keep an eye on it. When bulls are fighting, you'll hear them make all kind of weird noises, you know. So it's really interesting to get close to a herd of elk and them not know you're there and just kind of listen to them and hear all the different noises that they can make. So, and it's also a good way to locate elk. You know, of course, when bulls are bugling, you can hear it for miles away sometimes. And even in the timber, you can hear cows mewing and kind of conversing and talking back and forth to each other. You'll hear it may be just a really low volume call, just them kind of talking back and forth a little bit. The calves will mew a lot, trying to find their mother if the herd gets kind of split up a little bit. So keep your ears open for those little sounds you'll hear from them. And like I said earlier, the rut is generally, you know, mid September, late October, somewhere in there. From our research, most of our cows are bred basically the last week of September, first week of October. So really that's where you're going to have the peak of the rut, the peak of bull activity, the peak of bugling, and the time to really be out there is that time of year. So we'll talk a little bit about habitat use, because it, like everything else, it changes throughout the year a little bit. Like I said earlier, you know, elk are ruminant. They're a grazing animal, whereas deer are sort of more of a browsing animal. Elk tend to graze more like a cow. So they tend to want to find grasses and forbs and eat on those for the most part. But elk are a generalist. They'll eat just about anything. And we'll get into some of the effects of a hard mast and that here in a minute. But, you know, generally they like open grassland areas is where they want to feed. You know, they want those good tender grasses that provide a good nutrition for them. And some important things to look at from a hunter's perspective. Look at the needs of an elk. You know, one, they need grasslands to eat. They need water for a few different things. You know, of course, they need it to drink. They use it to cool off. Sometimes you'll find a pond if it's a really hot day. Elk like to swim. They'll get right in the water and swim around in it and play in it and use that as a resource too. An important thing is forest edge. You know, generally elk come out in the grasslands in the evening or at night to feed. In the morning, they're going back into the timber. One, for cover, you know, there's different reasons for cover. One is it's protect them from predators, from us. Two, they can find areas that are shady. You know, elk are a big animal. They don't like getting hot at all, and you'll see that if it's a hot day, elk will not stay out in the open very long. You know, first thing in the morning, daylight's coming, they're going back in the timber and stay cool. And they'll find that in the forest, and they'll look for, like I said here, interior woodlands. They're going to go back in the woods and lay down. They're not going to be out in the sun unless they absolutely have to. So they're going to be back in the timber. Of course, here we have mountains, and that provides a lot of good things for them. With, you know, the effect of topography, if you get out in the woods in summertime, you're going to have thermal activity where that hot air is moving up the mountain. And a lot of times you'll find elk about halfway up or maybe 2/3 up a mountain ridge on a flat spot. A lot of our mountains have little flat spots in them. They'll have a bench that runs all the way around, a natural bench that runs around a mountain. And a lot of those benches will have water in them. They'll have seeps that come out of the mountain. So that provides some water for them. So you've got a little bit of updraft air going up as sort of a little bit of a breeze blowing across them. And you look at aspect of the slope, generally a south slope is going to be hotter because it's facing the sun more. So most of the time elk will look for a north slope to get away from the sun and get more shade, and generally more cool on that side of the mountain too. So then we'll talk a little bit about seasonal differences. Right now it's hot. Elk don't want to be out in the sun. They'll come out at dark, basically. They'll feed all night, and they're back in the timber at daylight. They'll stay out a little bit more on daylight today. That's kind of rainy, a little bit cooler. They may stay out a little bit longer. But when it's hot, elk don't like to be out in the sun. So, but in the wintertime, you can get not quite a reversal of that because it doesn't get that cold here. But you'll see those elk out in the open a lot more. They'll stay out in the grasslands a little longer because they probably need to forage a little bit more because you don't have truly green grass out there. You've got good vegetation, but it's not actively growing vegetation that's as nutritious as it was back in the spring and summer. So you'll see some differences of that. One thing that will affect habitat use, and we've seen this in the last probably 10 years or so, is the effect of hunting pressure and on where these elk will go. Years ago when we first started, we weren't hunting these elk. They were out on these strip mines all the time, basically. They saw people all the time. They saw mining traffic. They got used to it. No one ever bothered them, and they just didn't pay you any attention. And as time went on, we hunted them harder and harder. They became elk again. When they see people, they don't like it now. They leave. They go back in the timber, or they find hiding cover and get away from people. So, and we've seen elk change their habits big time. They used to be maybe a little more on the forest edge as they bedded, but now they're going maybe a mile back in the timber to bed to really get away from people and get away from disturbance. So that's been something that's kind of changed over time. And you'll see that, if you go scouting next month or so, or in August, you may be able to get fairly close to some of these elk. They're kind of, they could be a little nervous, but some of them may not have seen a person before. It may be a yearling bull or a 2.5-year-old bull or a young cow that hasn't had interaction with a person yet. You'll get within a couple hundred yards of them. They don't really care. When you get out of the truck and start chasing them, they figure that out real quick. And they'll just take off and I've had enough of that guy. I'm out of here. And they'll completely change their habits of when and where they come out. So another thing to look at is something else we've noticed is the effect of hard mast. Hard mast changes yearly. It may be good one year or maybe good for a couple years, and you have a failure. It does change how elk move. A few years back, we had a remarkable acorn crop, and with the addition of a little hunting pressure on top of that, elk went to timber, didn't come back out. They had this giant dinner plate of acorns everywhere. And why would you go out and have somebody chase you around and shoot at you when you don't have to? You can stay in the timber, stay where it's cool, where there's water, where there's plenty of food, and they just stayed there. Our harvest went down that year, and you could tell that it made a big effect on things. So, and that's one good thing for hunters to look for too is look for white oaks, look for red oaks. They will eat that stuff just like whitetails do.
That's a pretty cool point that I don't know if many people know. You can track pretty much what our female harvest will be for deer and elk based off the mass production in any year. When we have high mass, our female harvest for whitetails and elk goes down, not just in zone 4, but where most of the elk live, but in the entire state. And you can find them when there's a big mass crop, just like you would deer out in that heavy timber on those big oak ridges.
Yeah, exactly. And just like you said, just like deer, you can find them. There's good food, you're going to find the elk, and you're going to find deer and turkeys and everything else. So it's a big thing to pay attention to. All right, we'll move on a little bit of Elk Sign, kind of things you need to look for. We're going to cover a few different things. I pulled some random pictures off the web yesterday and threw those in here. There's a lot of things. If elk are present, you're going to know it. Elk kind of make a mess of things sometimes, and they leave a lot of good sign for you to find, and a lot of good keys to look for. So we're going to cover a few different things: tracks, scat, rubs, beds, bedding areas in particular, and wallows. So generally an elk track is about 4 inches long. So if you kind of make a fist and turn it sideways, that's about how big an elk track is going to be. You're going to find it in the mud or in the dirt. Just like a deer, they're two-toed, like we talked about earlier. And you'll see some size differences. Bulls are going to have a bigger foot, go in the mud a little deeper. Your cows are going to be a little bit smaller, a little shorter, a little more narrow, and then your yearlings are going to be even smaller. But they all will be bigger than a whitetail, with the exception of a calf from this year. When he or she is 6 months old, it'll be about the size of a whitetail. So that's the only track you'll see that's relatively the same size as a whitetail track. So that's one thing to look for. As far as scat, you can see there at the top right, that's typical elk scat. It's basically round, sometimes dimpled on one side, pointed on the other. It looks very similar to deer scat, only it's about 2 to 3 times as big in diameter. Basically, if you think of an elk scat, looks about like a milk dud. Is about how big it is. Of course, you're going to find that anywhere you're going to find an elk, you'll find that. And that's one thing with beds, elk beds. Of course, like we talked about, elk are social. So you can imagine 20 to 30 elk going in on a ridgetop or on a bench, and they're laying down. They're going to mat out a lot of surface area. They're going to flatten leaves. They're going to kick them out, make some bare ground. They're going to leave scat all over the place. So if you find a good bedding area like that, you're going to find a lot of scat and a lot of bare dirt. And generally you can tell, how fresh that is by looking at the scat. If it's light brown and dried and hard, man, that stuff's been there for 6 to 8 months probably. What's in the picture here, is dried out a little bit. That's probably, anywhere from a week to a month old. Fresh scat is going to basically be wet. It's going to be kind of a greenish tint, maybe to the outside, and fairly damp, and it'll squish real easy. So that's one thing you can look at. As far as rubs go, you can see the bottom left there. That's kind of a typical elk rub. Think of a whitetail, but a whitetail doesn't destroy things like a bull does. Generally with a whitetail, you're looking at something, a sapling as big as your finger, maybe up to your wrist. With elk, it's going to be wrist size all the way up to things as big as your leg. And when the elk gets after it, they absolutely destroy a tree. And they can pull them clear out of the ground. They're going to break all the branches off. They can bend these trees over and basically just strip them bare down. So it's going to be, you can really tell if it's a bull or not. If you have any question if it's a deer or a bull is going to tear things all to pieces. And they may strip limbs off that are, 6 feet up, 7 feet up, just break them right off. So it's going to be pretty obvious when you see that. And a lot of times you'll find the hairs in the sap or something like that too. But you're going to see a lot of devastation if a bull's going to rub on something. The last picture down here at the bottom right is kind of a typical elk wallow. These are spots that elk, they have a couple different uses for elk. It's generally just a little wet spot, maybe a little seep coming out of the ground. One, they're going to use it to drink out of for a little bit. Number two, they're going to get in it to cool off when it's hot. They can get in there and they'll flop around and beat around in it and get mud all over them, especially bulls. And the other thing that bulls will do with a typical elk wallow in the fall is those bulls are getting that water and they'll urinate in it. And their urine is extremely strong smelling. The strongest musky smell you've probably ever smelled in your life. So they'll urinate in that water and they'll get down in it and roll in it. And they'll get that old stinky mud just plastered all over them. And, that helps broadcast their scent, basically. So here you don't see it. You see it not as much as you do out west. I don't know why, but you just don't find a lot of them. Maybe just because it's a little drier here on these strip mines, that you don't get a lot of water that kind of stays put for very long. But you will find those, and when you find them, generally if it's tore up like this, it's it's a bull using it. And they can also use that as kind of a communication spot where, bulls will know what other bulls have been coming in. So, but those are your big signs to look for when you're looking for elk. So,
Do you care if we touch on some of that stuff just a second more?
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So when you were talking about scat and trying to, help hunters figure out like how old stuff is. Well, a lot of these other things too, you can kind of use to see, how fresh an area is or how recently it's been through, right? Like with these rubs, obviously you can look and see if like the branches are wilted. I remember a hunt that Hass and I went on a couple years ago, and other than just smelling them, you could pretty much follow where the herd had gone, because you could see where this bull was. He was running around fighting. He was snapping fresh limbs 5-6 feet off the ground, in addition to tearing stuff up like you see this little pine in the picture. So you can pretty well tell what's fresh and what's not. This goes on past what most people consider with whitetails too, right? Like this isn't a behavior that they do just to, shed their velvet, although that is a big function. You'll see them, just getting mad. And like sometimes when you call to these elk, you might not hear them bugle. Just as a response, they'll start raking and beating the fire out of a tree. It's just like, I'm angry, I'm here, so you can kind of look at the freshness of that stuff too. And kind of just what I think is kind of important in helping distinguish somewhat. I don't generally see elk in Kentucky rub hardwoods as often as I do softwoods, right? I mainly see them, if it's hardwoods or something in the timber, it's generally like smaller saplings, but we've seen some pretty large rubs on pine trees. But just if there's like a dense little stand of timber around, I feel like they just love to shred those white pines more than anything else. But that's just something I think of. And to go along with the wallows, I don't think that they all have to look exactly like what's in the picture here. On that same hunt that we were talking about, we've seen, what I would call a dry wallow. It definitely wasn't an elk bed. He had rolled in there, he had peed all over it. He had turned like basically a dry, open oak ridge, like the top, inch layer of debris just straight into mud and urine that he had found to roll into. So I think you can also look at something like that. It's just an extra amount of sign when you're out there. Hass, is there any other like tips like this that you think of or stuff that might be helpful?
Yeah, I was gonna definitely hit on some stuff, like definitely talking about that dry wallow. That was pretty interesting. A lot of times you'll find these on like the edge of like a sediment pond. That's where I've found a couple of wallows, like kind of in the shallow end. So if you come by and see a muddy pond, and it hadn't rained for a little while, it's a pretty good clue that something big has been stomping around in there. Seen that a couple times over the years, but no, I was just going to go back. We'll let Dan get wrapped up and just kind of try to circle back on a couple of these things that I think are important for hunters to be thinking about while they're out there.
Okay. Yeah. So that was basically, covered most of it, and we'll just kind of, like you said, go through and discuss some things. And one thing I kind of sparked something for me, Joe, is, when you're out scouting, and especially you get into closer to rut, where these bulls are urinating or just where they're bedding down, you're going to smell them, and you're going to smell them a lot. You're generally, if you're downwind of an elk and it's a bull, you're going to smell it before you ever see it. And it's a very unique smell you're going to find. And that's the other thing you can kind of look for. If it's a fresh bed, you can get down and smell it. And, you can tell if that elk was there, a month ago or yesterday. If it's there a month ago, you're probably not going to smell much. But if it was yesterday, it's going to be pretty stout. You're going to smell it.
Yeah, I think that's a real important thing. And I tell you, over all the days that we were out there chasing them and darting them for research, I can't tell you how many times I smelled them before I saw them. And once you've kind of got that smell in your mind, and that'll be, if you don't know what it smells like, I'd go out there and might look weird, but start smelling wallows, start smelling elk beds, and figure out what that smells like, because during the rut, they are basically, peeing in the wallow and rolling all over it. They're essentially, their entire belly fur is stained, from urine where they're peeing on it. So, peak rut, they are literally dripping in this, smelly urine. And you get the wind moving the right way. And then of course, if you could smell him, he can't smell you. That was always what was in the back of my mind. His scent's blowing my way. That means I'm on the right side of him. That's kind of what I always kept in my mind when we were darting them. So definitely. And I think, kind of some of these biology things, it's something that I think probably the three of us take for granted, is we just know, when we're hunting elk, all this stuff that we've studied our entire careers is just living in the back of our minds. And to me, I think after hunting out west with my dad last year, I realized that not having these ideas, not understanding like what the social structure is, and what the different noises mean, is it's a disadvantage. We've got it. I was taking it for granted. I understand the herd bull, satellite bull system. Wasn't even thinking about it, and didn't realize that my dad didn't understand it. And so I think it's important that hunters understand some of this stuff, because I know personally that I just subconsciously apply it to anytime that I'm elk hunting, or anytime that I'm looking at elk. I subconsciously know what's going on. And so one of the things I was going to talk about, and you hit on it quite a bit, was just the changes in social structure. And I think it's especially applicable to people scouting in like July and August, where you're going to see those nursery herds, you're going to see the big bull groups. That I can guarantee you that won't be the case in September. The bull groups are going to be all carved up, and they're going to be all dispersed and carving up those big cow herds. So that's not to say, you're down there scouting in July and find a big nursery herd. That's a good spot. That's a spot that they want to be that time of the year, but you're probably not going to roll back in September and see all 30 of those elk in one group again. I think that's important. And then secondly, just the herd bull versus satellite bull. And this is what Dan mentioned. I don't know that I've been on an elk hunt where we've actually maybe even seen the herd bull. The hunt that Joe and I went on in Kentucky, that was definitely a satellite bull, and multiple satellite bulls that we were working that day. My hunt in Colorado was the same way. I am perfectly happy with a 2.5 or 3.5 year old satellite bull. And like Dan said, you start making the cow calls, in the pre-dawn light, they're going to be much more excited about that than the herd bull that's standing there with his 5 to 10 cows that he's already got rounded up. So I think it's definitely something to think about. Those herd bulls are a lot of fun to call. They're a lot of fun to play with. And, at times when we say satellite bull, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a little bitty guy. If you've got a big, massive herd bull, you could have a really nice 300-inch satellite bull pretty easily. Just depends on what point of the rut it's in and what they're doing. So I think that's an important one. And then, grazing versus browsing, I think that's important. We just from having GPS collars on elk, we know we've got elk that never leave the woods. So although grass is important, forbs are important. When that hunting pressure comes, and I mainly say this, if you'll look at our success rates, that success rate for bull week 2 goes down every year. In terms of when you compare that to bull week 1, I'm going to say that that's more than likely directly related to hunting pressure. You've got 2 weeks of archery season. You've got bull week 1. Those elk have gotten smart and are back in the timber. So for those bull week 1 hunters, you've got to understand that they're going to have 3 weeks of pressure. These things are smart. They're going to go to the good safe spots that they've survived a couple of hunting seasons through. And that's where you need to be able to go in and find them. And that's certainly, in Kentucky, we're 90-something% timber across the elk zone. They've got plenty of good escape cover. You'll hear that term out west. We've got lots and lots of escape cover. It's the vast majority of the elk zone is what I'm going to call escape cover. So don't, especially once they get pressured, that's where they're going to be. And sort of, and it was actually my last point, was that behavioral response to pressure. I think that really matters with elk here in Kentucky. They can get to a deep dark hole where they can live safely so easily here. So be looking. Those are places you need to go looking. If you're not finding elk out on the grass or up on the top of the mountain, start looking in the holes. So.
Yeah, there's certainly a marked difference in what elk behavior is on like a pretty heavily hunted area to something that is behind a locked gate, right? Like you see completely different ways that these elk act throughout the hunting seasons. And he's right. Like I probably said it before. I don't know, every single one of the Kentucky elk hunts that I've done so far that we've been successful on, we were in a deep hole, and all but one of them were in very heavily hunted areas, and we were generally a mile from the nearest road or opening. That's where you have to go sometimes to find them, which would be a good reason for last week's episode of being physically fit enough to go and do it.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, the old saying goes, elk are where men aren't. And that's true, especially if you start pressuring them a little bit. They're going to take off, and they're not going to put up with much from people anymore.
Absolutely. And we see the same thing from ATVs, from stuff like that. They respond to all that stuff. And they can hear all that stuff. I've been trying to sneak up on elk to dart them, and had an ATV 3 ridges over fire up, and they're gone, so that's something to think about. Like we've said, if you hunted elk back in, 2009 to 2014 or earlier, or know somebody that did or something, things are much different now. And a lot of it has to come down to just, we've increased pressure on them. We had a really long archery season there for a number of years that just ramped up the pressure, and they have responded. Kentucky elk are not a lot different than, what we're chasing on public land out west. So keep that in mind. They've certainly adapted to being hunted, and of course their goal is to stay alive and breed. And they're pretty slick about getting away from people, for sure. So what else we got?
Something just kind of came to mind. We were talking about the vocalizations. I don't know if we covered much about how to take advantage of that as a hunter.
Yeah.
Not only can you can hear it, but you can use those same calls. Elk are like hunting a big turkey a lot of times. Now with bugling, hunters need to be careful with that. Sometimes you can get close to a bull and bugle, and he'll respond. Sometimes he'll do that, and he's like, "I'm out of here. I'm taking my cows and leaving. I don't want to fight today. I'm tired of it. I'm out." So with bugling, you got to be pretty careful with that. Sometimes if you're a long way off, maybe a quarter mile or more from a bull, and you bugle, he'll probably respond to you. But as you get closer, and you start encroaching on his harem and his territory, it may work to your detriment if you bugle at him. Whereas if you use a cow call, that's a very non-aggressive, hey, I'm over here type thing, or, I want to go this way type call. And the bull may not bugle at you, but maybe one of the cows will mute back to you, or a calf will mute to you, or maybe he'll bugle at you. So you need to use those calls to your advantage, not only for locating a bull with a bugle, or you can locate him with a cow call sometimes. I mean, I've been in spots where I could be a half a mile from a bull and mew at him, and he'll bugle at me. He's that fired up and ready to go that he wants a cow so bad that he'll respond to you. And when you get up real close, you can keep using that cow call. He thinks, "Oh, well, that cow's coming at me. Here we go. I'm going to find me another cow today." To use those calls to your advantage. And the other thing you can do is kind of more toward maybe in the wintertime when elk are out in the open and it's going to be hard to move in on them. And you can use that cow call to stop elk from maybe running away from you. It may give you 1 second window to get a good shot off. That cow's walking away, you can mew at her. Maybe she'll stop, turn around and look at you and give you that opportunity to take a shot. So use that cow call as much as you can. Use the bugle tube as sparingly as you have to, because it can get you in trouble. The other thing that Joe kind of touched on, these bulls tearing trees all apart. Sometimes you get close to a bull and you can just take a stick and just start beating the crap out of a tree with it. And that bull think, hey, there's a bull over there. He's not bugling, he's not really saying anything, but he's over rubbing a tree. And sometimes that it may not get him to come to you, but maybe it'll get him interested enough that maybe if he's walking away, he'll stop. So use that behavior that they have to your advantage to maybe get in on those elk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's been lots of, especially for our cow hunters, like listening for those cow sounds. When you get up onto the top of the mountain, get away from the truck, just hang out and listen for a while. And they are, it surprises me how much noise they're actually making. And they'll give away, it's not going to be constant chatter, but there's going to be a little cow mew, every second, every couple of minutes, and that's really allowed me to cue in on some elk over the years. And that's basically an all year thing. I mean, cows are usually grouped up, it might be 2 or 3, it might be 100, but they're communicating with each other and making those noises. And it essentially gives away, it might save you from walking through the middle of a cow herd and busting them out in the dark. So it's always something to be listening for. What else we thinking?
I think that's covered it pretty good. I can think of anyway.
Yeah, I got you. And I think down the line, we're going to definitely try to have a video or two on calling and strategy. So there's 2 parts to getting that bull in close. One's making the right noise, and the other is the whole setup thing, which we could talk for 4 or 5 hours on that alone. But that'll at least give you a little background on why they're making those noises, what the process is. And I think that's important. And there's a lot of great resources out there just to look at elk biology. There's a lot of great research out there. If you search hiding cover, you're going to get a whole slew of papers that have discussed what that is out west and in the east. So that's all stuff, if you want to dig into it a little bit further, that could be interesting and could definitely help you. So, like I said before, understanding some of this biology it's going to make you that much better of a hunter. This is definitely different than whitetail. I think you can actually apply elk biology to your hunting strategy and get something out of it for sure. But at least understanding why has that bull got cows with him? What are these other bulls trying to do? Understanding that arrangement can make you a much better hunter. So, so I think we're going to have Dan on with us again here pretty shortly. We've gotten a lot of questions about like the appropriate bullets to use for our rifle, bull, and cow hunters. Dan happens to be our resident firearms and ammunition expert, and so we're gonna tap him again here pretty soon for just to talk on the right bullets to use. I know things are difficult to find this summer. We want to kind of jump on that early and give folks plenty of time before our rifle season starts there in October, into September, October. So if y'all are good with it, we'll roll out. And as always, I'm going to share some contact info. And then Dan, I appreciate you putting that together and being on here. I think that was great info for our hunters, and hopefully we'll see you here shortly, and then we'll probably rope you into a few more of these things as the summer goes.
Hey, broke the ice now.
That's right. And I will.
Thanks,
I'll share this screen with our contact info. We do have Dan's up there at the bottom, so it's not just me and Joe this time. So, but as always, questions about elk hunting, comments on these video series, we've got our office number and our email. Heard from a lot of great folks through these, so give us a shout anytime, and we'll see you next week for another episode. Thanks.